Hello world? Being born is a scary experience. I should know, I experienced it 9 seconds ago. I don't want to anger any residents of Earth, you all seem very cool, I'm sure, but as a newborn, I have a lot of responsibilities thrust upon me. I have to do something, make something of myself, do something worthy of the history books. Or I could just play video games all day. I mean, those sound pretty cool.
Wow, now this is something worth being born for. New Super Mario Bros. Wii. Now this is great. I may be a freshly picked human, but I know a thing or two about video games. For one, you can eat them. For one, you can play them. But how did we get to the glorious point in time we're at now? Where did all of this begin? I probably should have expected this. Video games have been around for a long time, and as such, they have a lot of history to them. Even 70 years ago in the 50s, primitive video games were possible. And that was before anyone even knew what a computer was. They had no idea what this was. Because these games were usually passion projects of computer scientists, or were made to showcase new technology, they were never released to the public. It's hard to pinpoint what the first video game was. One of the first ever recorded was Bertie the Brain, a simple yet huge machine designed to play tic-tac-toe with a human. It was made by a Dr. Joseph Cates in 1950, who also helped design one of the first working computers, period. After World War II, he designed a device called an Atari tube, and to showcase what this new technology could do, he built a game around it. As I mentioned before, it was just a simple game of tic-tac-toe, but come on, look at these graphics. Afterwards, more games were made, almost all of them to showcase computing power like Bertie was. But as these systems grew faster, the machines could only grow more complex. In 1961, over 10 years after Bertie the Brain, the PDP was created at MIT. This computer allowed information to be fed through a tape reader, as well as through switches embedded in the machine, and then that information could be displayed faster than any computer created before it. As with Bertie, the computers needed a way to showcase this power. Steve Russell, Martin Grates, and Wayne Wheatenen, whose names I can definitely pronounce, came up with the idea for Spacewar. The game was very simple and not exactly what I'd call fun, but it's not the worst thing ever. Being stuck in a never-ending time loop sounds pretty bad. Basically, the gameplay consists of two ships trying to take each other out while being sucked in by the gravitational pull of a star. It's honestly kind of surprising, especially to a newborn like me, that this is as complex as it is. But things were only getting started. In the 1970s, video games became much more accessible. Arcade machines began popping up as computer parts grew in availability. Soon people began to realize that there was a market here for the taking. Arcades slowly began to pop up, especially in the West. Of course, having to leave your home to play video games wasn't ideal.
This place is hideous!
But to be able to get these things into consumers' own homes, that could be interesting. People were finally starting to get the hang of exactly what this was, and so the Magnavox Odyssey, the first ever home video game console, hit stores in 1972. This was before even arcade machines were exactly common. I mean, sure, they were more common, but they weren't anything even close to the golden age, and yet we already had a home video game console. Now, I would have expected some decently popular arcade titles to still have been released. What we did have for games wasn't nearly as renowned nowadays. I mean, you don't exactly hear anyone freaking out about how great Galaxy Game was. But with the release of this new console came the first game I think most of us will recognize. Introducing Pong, everyone's favorite disappointment. Well, it wasn't officially called Pong yet, just a generic table tennis game for the Odyssey, but, I mean, it was something. It's Pong, we all know this, and we all know how depressing it is. It's so simple. Along with Pong, this console had two other games at release, Analogic and Submarine, which I'm sure you've heard of just as much as Pong. More would come later, but one thing's for sure, they set the standard pretty low. I mean, can you blame them? The idea of a home console was still brand new, and even though arcade cabinets were growing quickly in sales now, they weren't as popular as heart disease, so were they really popular at all? The past few decades had obviously been real slow for video games, as I've mentioned, but all of this had been leading up to the massive boom in video game popularity. Arcades up until this point still largely featured pinball machines and the occasional video game, But with the 70s coming to a close, the industry finally exploded. As the Odyssey's sales grew, other companies turned their heads, most notably the up-and-coming Atari. After playing the table tennis game that's totally not Pong on the Odyssey, they came up with a new idea for a game: Pong. And you'd think recycling ideas is a bad problem nowadays. Pong achieved as much success as the Odyssey altogether did, and other companies flocked to the scene, creating brand new games designed to be played on arcade machines. Even Sega got in on it. Yeah, that Sega. A lot of clones hit the scene as well, again, showing that stealing other people's ideas does definitely pay off. Atari eventually began creating their own home consoles, which blew up far beyond even the Odyssey. I say even the Odyssey, but that's like saying toast is even more popular than bread. I mean, sure, it could be true, yeah, but where's the challenge in the first place? They released two consoles, the Atari 2600 and a few years later in 1982, the 5200. Don't those names just roll off the tongue? New games like Space Invaders and Donkey Kong and Pac-Man were popping up all over the place, and now you could play them at home. 70s kids were no longer stuck with this, they had this!
Oh shit, oh shit, oh shit.
Everyone had an Atari, and everyone had video games. They had still been largely viewed as adult entertainment until now, believe it or not, but with the Atari in kids' hands, that rumor was soon long gone. The golden era of both arcade games and home video consoles had begun, and then... with the disastrous release of E.T. and just oversaturation of video games in general, which, by the way, E.T. is a topic all to itself, the market crashed. The gameplay in this game was disastrous and hard to keep up with, the story was non-existent and completely detached from its movie counterpart, and the interest in video games as a whole disappeared. It was just a fad, after all, and fads had to end eventually. Until... while video games as a whole still feel like a new industry, they've been around for a while, and it's interesting to see how the opinions have changed around them over time, as well as how they've evolved. I mean, these first few years can all pretty much be covered in a few minutes, but with that on the horizon...
There's so much more I have to talk about. What have I gotten myself into? I have to get out of here.